in the greater context, the more gaslighting there is, the more there's going to be a pushback from people to act or step up or act violently. So right now in the UK, you have, well, guns are banned. So all the violence is stabbings, and the rates have gone up. You even have, in these cases, the gaslighting comes from the politicians and or the media saying that, well, us opening the floodgates and having people who do not share our values is not a problem, and what you're seeing with your own eyes is not happening. And the more that kind of top-down gaslighting, that this narrative is going to cause people to act with more hate than if you just had a honest and open conversation about this. The more it's left untreated and the more it's suppressed, it's going to happen. You will always get a push-pull with these kind of things. You cannot have this amount of pressure build up without some kind of a release. And either that release is through constructive dialogue or it's through action and violence.
Mm-hmm. Hello and welcome back to the Critical Compass. Thanks for joining us today. Today we have we're going to focus on a couple things today, but primarily on kind of what's happening in the UK right now, as far as what some are labeling as a response to migrant crime of various types. And then what others are viewing as yet another uprising of far right. White extremism, nice lightweight stuff like that today, James. Hey, what do you think?
Yeah, the UK riots are going on right now, and there's no shortage of opinions on that. But you summed it up correctly. You have people roaming the street with weapons, and then you have the gaslighting of the news and politicians saying that, well, it's these far right extremists that are inciting this violence, and they're not calling out the people. Pretty much like if you're walking around with a knife, that should be like actionable for the police to actually go after those with the weapons. And right now we're almost seeing speech is treated more harshly when it comes to policing than weapons or violence. And this is very much tied to, depending on what boxes you check off, depending on what shade your skin color is in UK right now, it seems like there are preferential treatment given to some groups and others not so much.
Well, I think that what we're seeing is a response that, to my eyes, and maybe to my conspiratorial bent, is sort of reminiscent of how I can't speak too much to the January 6th riots in the U.S. I can speak more to what we both know about the Freedom Convoy in Canada. This feels to me sort of at a fundamental level in a similar sort of way of you've got a coordinated response from a mainstream media or a kind of a journalistic talking point that everything you see happening in the streets right now is solely because of there are white racists in the UK, and they are unhappy sharing their land with immigrants. That's what the message is. What I've got some examples of, I think we can probably get into this later, is some it's sort of an interesting look into the history of what some of these judges who are laying down these really hefty sentences on these armchair rioters is the term, actually. I should find that link. We'll put it in the description. But yeah, as far as I know, and maybe you can kind of lay a little bit more of the background on this, but what really kicked this off, I believe, is what what was effectively a triple homicide stabbing of some children at I think it was like a Taylor Swift, like, I don't know if it was a dance class or a singing class, something like that. It was like a Taylor Swift themed party or whatever. And this person the person who did that wasn't an immigrant. He was he is the child of immigrants. But that, I think, was sort of what a lot of people who started this protest really viewed as kind of the last straw. Do I kind of have the background close?
I think in that particular circumstance, you're more familiar with that part of it, but I've been following a lot of the kind of one-off. There's been like no shortage of stabbings and or attacks. There's the notable example of like, well, there was a migrant going around stabbing. The police in that situation, they were holding back the person trying to stop the migrant from stabbing, and one of the police officers got stabbed in the neck. You have that incident. You have no shortage of other violent events, which seem to be exasperated when you have a large influx of people who may not share the same values as the country that they're immigrating into. In this case, UK, it's been these numbers have been shifting quite a bit. So I think it can be a combination of events, and then you obviously have one event that, like, well, it just overspills at that point. It's just too much for people to ignore.
Yeah, this is that article I was referring to here. First armchair rioter jailed for 20 months over online post inciting racial hatred in the UK. Becomes the first person to be jailed through following three. Yeah, it was a Taylor Swift dance party in Southport. So yeah, this term has been being repeated online, which is absolutely incredible to me that this is a real thing and we're not living in fake dystopia land. But what do you think of? What comes to your mind when you read a term like this and you see somebody getting jailed for almost 2 years for posts that he made online?
Well, that is not this feels like something that would happen in Russia.
Yeah.
That would be cracking down on like social media posts. And from my understanding right now, the UK is, I think, leading in number of arrests for online discourse. Out of any other country, they have the most. And we still label the UK as a free democracy. And if people can't speak their mind freely, is that still a democracy? Because who defines what inciting racial hatred is? Who defines what hate speech is? Who defines, we've seen it in other contexts of like, well, a dead naming is that inciting hatred? That's hate speech because somebody's feelings is getting hurt at the end of it. So who defines that? And if something is ill-defined, it's going to be abused by whoever has a certain ideology or a certain idea behind it. So,
well, I'll tell you who defines that, James, and you're not going to like it because I fear that you're in violation.
Did I just violate it, or are you talking about other podcasts? Because
you didn't think before you posted, James. And so the UK Gov is going to apparently, I should find the post and I should put it beside it, but they're apparently going to try and extradite Americans who either, I don't know if it's just if they talk about it and make fun of it, or if they I suppose contribute in some way to the incitement of racial hatred. So yeah, this is a pretty clear, to me, it's a pretty clear example of these are the people exactly who define what is and what isn't hateful.
Well, they take it very seriously, according to. Well, wait. I'm just reading this more closely. CPS takes online violence seriously. So that's
let's click on this. Let's see. You can be prosecuted for posting material online which incites violence or hatred. You can also be prosecuted for sharing this material. Sharing this material that they
a repost.
A repost, that's right. Yeah, this term, this online violence, this is a very interesting term, and it's not something that, to me, like, I don't think that we've agreed that this is even a thing. Like, I don't think that I don't know. I mean, I suppose that, you know, the UK is not Canada or the US, specifically the US with their speech protections, but this notion that words can be violence, or that you can, like, so the reason that guy got 20 months was because some of his posts were interpreted as encouraging people to, I believe, like set a hotel on fire or something that was housing migrants. Now, I understand that there are certain provisions in free speech laws in many Western countries that don't have carve-outs for speech that incites violence. But can you say that I suppose that when I hear something like that, I think more of it in the way of, like, if you're in a group of people physically present somewhere, and you've got, you know, a Molotov cocktail in your hand, or your buddy does, and you whip your buddy up into a fervor and get him to throw it, and then that causes some damage. Obviously, that's an incitement that, you know, you helped encourage your buddy to do something stupid like that. However, when it's separated by a screen, or like a phone or a computer, and who knows how many, you know, tens or dozens or hundreds of miles, can you really say that you have the same ability to affect somebody's actions via online violence? What are your thoughts on that?
I would say,
am I making a distinction without a difference here?
I think there might be like another gradient to this, is like, if somebody had a group, and let's even look at Antifa, they are organizing to disrupt, and actually their online behavior transcends into a actionable, like, on the street violence, because they are going in, they're disrupting, and many of them, there's been no shortage of attacks to people who had, they were not deserving of the attacks from Antifa, and that was online discourse. But that was in those cases, that is a organized group, and they're planning something. So I think you'd have to make an exception there versus somebody shouting into a megaphone. And again, you can't really distinguish between, like, a serious call to action, somebody just venting, or somebody being sarcastic or satire. Like, how do you differentiate between the tone? Because unless you make a note of sarcasm, I even did this today when I jokingly said, somebody made a post about spinach, saying spinach was bad for you, and I jokingly supported that by telling people that, well, we evolved eating spinach, and we have proof of it because we have cave paintings of our ancestors defending their spinach crops against woolly mammoths. And some people believed it, because I didn't I didn't say it was sarcastic. And it's getting very difficult to discern between serious posts and sarcastic posts, or an actual call to violence. And we also can't be responsible for, like, there are people who are mentally ill and will take something sarcastic and they'll interpret it in different ways. So how much responsibility do we have for every single interpretation of something that we may or may not say?
Yeah, that's a big one, I think, because it comes down to I think it really depends on how you view personal agency. If you believe that you if you fundamentally believe that people are in control of their own actions and are responsible for their own actions, can you ever truly be said to have been influenced by somebody just saying something online? Like, is there ever really that exact one-to-one correlation of, well, this guy said on his Twitter feed that I should go, harm some immigrants, and so I went and harmed some immigrants. So not only am I getting disciplined for it, but the guy who posted that and influenced me is getting disciplined for it too. Well, I don't know. I don't know about that second step, because I feel like if you're gonna do something, like if you're gonna firebomb a hotel, I feel like that was already in you. Like, you were already gonna do that. You didn't really need that final push. That is something that you were capable of doing.
Well, there's another aspect to it is, I think the more in this, in the greater context, the more gaslighting there is, the more there's going to be a pushback from people to act or step up or act violently. So right now in the UK, you have, well, guns are banned. So all the violence is stabbings, and the rates have gone up. You even have somewhere like Sweden, which is, for their numbers of rape right now, they are one of the higher countries, I think, per capita, and they've seen a demographic shift. So it is not like like natural born Swedes doing that as people who do not.
Yeah, we have the data for that. I believe actually you shared that with me the other day, so we can link to that.
Yeah. So in these cases, the gaslighting comes from the politicians or the media saying that, well, us opening the floodgates and having people who do not share our values is not a problem, and what you're seeing with your own eyes is not happening. And the more that kind of top-down gaslighting, that distorted messaging, that this narratives, as long as it's perpetrated, this narrative is going to cause people to act with more hate than if you just had a honest and open conversation about this.
Yeah.
The more it goes, the more it's left untreated, and the more it's suppressed. It's gonna happen. You will always get a push-pull with these kind of things. You cannot have this amount of pressure build up without some kind of a release.
Mm-hmm.
And either that release is through constructive dialogue, or it's through action and violence.
Yeah. And you have you also have an institutional problem in the justice systems in these countries, where it feels like you have a two-tiered system where the people who are committing these crimes, that prior to there being this floodgate opened, as you put it, aren't being punished in the same ways that those crimes were being punished prior. I don't have examples offhand, but anyone can look and see these. There's plenty of examples that were posted, on Twitter lately about, however you want to, give an example, and there's a case of it. Like I off the top of my head, I recall like a 17-year-old, I think it was a Pakistani immigrant who didn't really receive any sentence for raping a 12-year-old, because, as this kid put it, he just didn't know that was rape. So like, there's you can see these scenarios. If anyone else did them, if anyone else did these actions, behaved in this way, they would be punished much differently. And like you say, I think people see enough examples of this, or read enough examples of it in the news, and they build up a model in their mind of, well, no, this isn't being taken seriously, and if I don't do something about it, I can't trust my institutions to do anything about it. So what is there left to do other than a vigilante response?
Yeah, and that's not just the UK. We're seeing that in the United States.
Absolutely.
You can directly see uh, areas, well, like you have very democratic run cities that have the highest number of repeat offenders. And that's directly tied to like a catch and release system. You have this also in Canada, and very much this happens more in the cities where, again, maybe these are drug related crimes or these are fueled by drug, and then somebody's breaking in, they are on the streets causing problems, and they're well known to the police. And because of judges and the framework that they have, they're not doing anything. And I think people are noticing as well. And it just adds up to just more chaos and less safety for the average person. Obviously, if these people are reoffending, there's no deterrence. So the UK, I think, is just a few years ahead of Canada if these same patterns would continue.
Yeah, and speaking of this kind of legal, what it could be, legal capture, it could be viewed as. I'm going to share this thread here, and we don't have to go through all the points, but this is a very worrying thing so this Pagliacci the hated, this person actually, her name's Anna Slatz. She's the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Redux Mag. It's a journalistic, it's an online publication, just reading from their site, with a focus on covering crime, child predators, and women's rights. Anna's from Canada, and she posted this thread that she compiled of, so I'm just going to read it here. Almost every judge I've identified as being involved in the rapid prosecution and incarceration of individuals who participated in the Southport riots has a history of letting convicted pedophiles walk free with no jail time. So here's a short thread on two-tier justice. And I think it's important that we do name these people. Judge Andrew Menery sentenced William Nelson Morgan, 69, to 32 months in prison for refusing to move out of the way of police officers. Menery previously led a pedophile who collected... I don't even know if I should just say these words, but we can just read them. Let him walk with no jail time because his lawyer said he had good character. Yeah.
Wait, 32 months, that's almost 3 years.
Yeah.
For
refusing to move out of the way of police officers. Yeah. Here's Judge John Temperley, sentenced Billy Thompson, 31, to 12 weeks in prison for emojis which incited racial violence. Temperley previously let a pedophile who had been stashing child abuse images walk free because he had displayed remorse. Interesting. Do you think that person, James, displayed more remorse maybe than the person who used emojis to incite racial violence? Who do you think's remorse should be more valuable? That's rhetorical, of course. Judge Francis Laird sentenced Charlie Bullock, 21, to 18 months in prison for throwing rocks at a line of police. So, just go back here. 32 months in prison for refusing to move out of the way of police officers, and 18 months for throwing rocks at a line of police.
So you are like better to throw rocks at police than you are to move out of the way.
You may as well. If you're going to, just give her.
Actually, no, I know what happened. He was standing off to the side when he threw the rocks. If he was standing in front of the police, that'd be an extra 2 years.
Yes, right. So. That's right. Yeah, I'm not going to read this out loud either, but we can see this highlighted portion.
No jail time.
No jail time. Yeah, no jail.
So
for showing remorse.
And these aren't just a couple isolated. This is a long list.
This is a pattern. So here's another one. Judge Paul Sloan sentenced Leanne Hodgson, 43, to 2.5 years for shouting racist abuse at a police officer. So Sloan had previously let a pedophile caught with 10,000 images of schoolgirls walk free because he hadn't looked at the images frequently enough. Judge Neil Rafferty denied bail to even those arrested with viewing the riots remotely. Yeah, this is This is another disgusting one. Judge Mark Bury. I mean, I don't know. There's just so many examples of these just absolutely morally reprehensible actions that are not being punished.
This is specifically more on the sexual abuse side, where
that's what that thread is.
Yeah, because this is what Redux focuses on.
Yeah.
You can find people have made similar lists, and if we find it, we'll add it to the show notes of well, here's somebody who only got 6 months for stabbing, who stabbed somebody else, got 6 months, and here's a longer term sentence for something for inciting violence or some hate speech.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing is this is the inversion of this. I don't think you don't accidentally get to this. This is an inversion of what should happen in reality. And I think no rational human looking at this just from a purely like without any ideology, just from a purely moral sense, I don't think you would reevaluate the moral weightings of these actions. The only reason you're getting this is because of ideological beliefs that reframe the whole moral landscape, and it's distorted the whole moral landscape, and that's through this DEI lens.
Yeah, you have and you see it in Canada too. To bring it back home here, where when you mentioned the catch and release policies that Canada has, well known for having, I think this is actually explicit in the wording. I'd have to find an example of it, but I do believe that they actually do word it in the way of, basically the crimes that people from marginalized communities commit must be weighted differently than crimes of other communities, members of non-marginalized, which only means white in the Western world, right? The crimes of marginalized people from marginalized groups must be treated differently, because I guess the implication is that they couldn't help themselves, like they just they weren't given a fair shake, and so they're they didn't know what they were doing, or they didn't they couldn't have helped it because whatever reason. Like, to me, that's it's a very patronizing, very infantilizing way of viewing human beings, because I don't believe that that's actually the case. I can see an argument for why somebody who maybe always lived in poverty behaves in a way psychologically that maybe they steal because they never had anything, so the only way they could ever get anything was just like, I understand that. But if you're a person who has a criminal history of of abuse or very serious acts of violence, things like this, that to me that shouldn't matter, because the actions are happening anyway. I don't think the next victim of this person particularly cares about that person's backstory if it could have been prevented.
Exactly. Yeah. There is something to be said about echoes of trauma or echoes of abuse through generations, through families. That is something that, like, you, by the same way you can say, like, oh, that person had really good parents and some of the values came through because of that.
Yeah.
That good parenting, and the inverse is true as well. They've used language to distort this, and it actually changes how we view people. So marginalized, that means that somebody else did that to them. It takes away personal agency from the individuals. It's saying, well, the system created you this way and you don't have free will, and any hardship or any difference in outcome is the system's fault and not your fault. And with that kind of wording, or if you're saying, well, Canada's a racist country and all the cards are stacked against you, like, that's a pretty hopeless situation. Like, that it doesn't empower individuals. What it does is it empowers a state to find solutions for them. Same thing with homelessness. Somebody's not a homeless person anymore. They are unhoused because somebody
or
unhoused
experiencing
them.
homelessness.
Yeah, they're experiencing homelessness or somebody unhoused them. And again, that takes away from any sense of personal responsibility or the hope of invoking change by yourself without a large government to set the framework for you to change your life.
Yeah, if that's exactly right. If an institution or a history of institutions have placed you in the margins, then by that framework, only they can remove you from those margins. Yeah, it's a very I was having this kind of an unrelated discussion actually with some family members the other day about why the American Constitution is such a unique one in the world. And the term, and I can't remember, this isn't my idea. I can't remember who I heard it from. They were talking about why the word inalienable, another big one, is so important in that language in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights. I don't know. But the notion of inalienable rights, which means inalienable, means even you can't deny yourself those rights because they're instilled by God. So not even you can deny your own humanity, and that's a very the natural human rights that you were born with, endowed by God. Like those are very powerful words that not a lot of people view themselves as having. A lot of people view the rights they have in their society as being bestowed upon them by a state or by a government or by some institution. And if you view it like that, well, then they can also take those away from you. So there needs to be a recognition, I think, kind of across the Western world now, that there are certain, it's not racist or xenophobic or it's none of these words to believe that you have the right to live in a peaceful and harmonious way. That is something that you should view as something that simply by you existing on this planet you are owed, and not by a government, but by just the fact that you're here. So maybe this is a little bit too philosophical, but any thoughts on that?
I think that's a perfect point to reinforce, and I think you see that a little bit. It overlaps into this debate on immigration. I can't remember where I first heard this, but somebody was proposing that there's almost a country, its culture, and its values are not just, it's not just the individuals living right now in the present. It also reflects the future and the past. So it's everybody who lived, and it was all their blood, sweat, and tears that went into creating the framework, creating the system that we have, creating the culture, and creating things that work. And then right now we're living that, and we're handing it off to the future generation, to our children. That unfolds as well. And we almost have this responsibility to honor the sacrifices and the way that things are set up to even get us to this point. And I think there's a lot that, first of all, we have a lot of revisionist kind of policies of, well, we named a road after somebody and we think they're a bad person now, and we retroactively deem them a bad person. And by all other accounts, they were somebody who built the community. They were an upstanding citizen, and they are deemed a racist by somebody's definition now. And
by our modern definition. Yeah.
By our modern definitions, outside of the context of when they lived and what they were doing outside of that, we, instead of talking about it and saying, well, this is where we are at now, we are renaming things and trying to bury history. And we almost treat history as, well, if you have this idea of like, well, Canada's a systemically racist place, then of course you would want to pretty much dismantle all of history. You'd want to rewrite it and dismantle the system that is actively racist. So this motivates people to both kind of attack any, and it's not straight white males. They're kind of the crux, but it is any Western values that got us to this point. And a lot of them would be hardworking white males or Christians, or that are maybe they're attacked more. They're more at the tip of the spear of these attacks, of this dismantling, but it's not just them. It is Western values that are being dismantled. And then as they're being dismantled, well, there's this idea of this global citizen. Well, what does it mean to be a global citizen? And with that, they're trying to have these open borders that, well, your country doesn't belong to you anymore. You have no right to it. And with the dismantling, opens the gates to just importing everybody here. But
yeah,
the North America couldn't handle 3 billion people. Like we couldn't save all the impoverished people in the world all at once. Like we do not have the structure for that.
Yeah.
Is it our responsibility to open the doors and solve all the problems, or are those problems best solved in the countries that, like, if there's hunger and poverty in countries, do we solve it by having people move away from that? Or do we create the systems? Do we help empower people in those countries to create the systems to fix the problems?
Sounds like you want to spread some freedom there, James. What do you think?
Well, you don't do it top down. You you give them the tools. Well, this is another point of you'll hear people talk about, well, in Canada, well, it's doctors and engineers that are coming over. Like, well, that's partially true, but is that necessarily the best thing as well? Is it the best thing to have the most talented people from these countries? These are highly creative, highly skilled people, high functioning individuals that would normally put those skills into increasing the livelihoods of them around, like the people around them in the communities of wherever they're from. If all that talent leaves these places, if there's no incentives, then you are lacking the creative talent and the creative individuals to solve some of these problems in those places. So they are losing some of this capability to solve these problems for themselves. So we are sapping their solution away from them.
Yeah, and it certainly is not, like you say, it's not all doctors and lawyers and whoever coming here.
That is a thread.
I know that's a talking point. But even if it was, that's a whole other discussion. But our Canada's licensing and certification systems in our institutions is crazy. Like it's one of the worst in the world, from what I understand. And just a small anecdote. My mom used to work in oral pathology, which is a very specialized form of dentistry where an oral pathologist is essentially a doctor and a dentist, and so there are very few offices in the country for this specialty, and they had people working in that department as lab techs who were licensed orthodontists in other countries. So you have somebody who is working as an extremely high-end specialty dentist in this person I'm thinking of is from I think from Venezuela, Colombia or Venezuela, and they could only, this is an orthodontist who is now working as a lab tech in Canada. They came to Canada to work as an orthodontist because that's what they were doing in their modern medical system country, and they couldn't. It took years. It took I think it took like 6 years for this person to recertify everything completely and start working in orthodontics again, which is, it's ridiculous. Like it's complete nonsense.
You even do the number on that. I'm like, well, there's a certain amount of specialists that the world needs a certain number of, like, there's going to be a certain number of health problems, and you have a certain number of specialists. And if some of them are coming to Canada and they're not even using their skills for that specialty, then that's worse than them just staying at home.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I want to take it back actually to a point you made about Western countries, specifically North America, Canada, and the U.S. How responsible are we for taking these people from across the world? We have people talking out of both sides of their mouth when they say, the same people who want you to believe that Canada and the U.S. are these, irredeemable nations with histories of slavery and oppression and residential schools and just horrifying racism and bigotry. We're that, but also we're the destination of choice for every single country in the world right now who is experiencing some sort of refugee crisis. So how do you square that? How are you such a horrible, ethically bankrupt nation, and yet we're so desirable that we need to take in all the millions of people annually who would kill to be here? I don't think that works.
Yeah, you wouldn't have so many people wanting to come over if the conditions here for them were really like worse than where they came from. It's also
you have to acknowledge implicitly that it's worse where they came from. You have to acknowledge that if there is a reason why there are people dying in rafts crossing the English Channel to get to the UK. Like there's a reason why they're doing that.
So one other point on this is you have this specific idea that, well, racism in North America and Canada and the US is at its highest. And they think it's just, well, it's a racist country, and they distort the numbers and they treat it as a endemic that we need to fix. And what we don't realize is that there is plenty of racism in countries. Just because somebody could be 2 shades of brown in the Middle East, and they have plenty of reason to hate each other.
Yeah.
Same thing in India. They have a caste system.
Yes.
There's no shortage of racial hatred for, well, even sometimes it's just tribalism focused on some quality, and sometimes these qualities matter and sometimes they don't. Sometimes you can't even define these qualities. The caste system is like, well, the same thing of like, well, you're upper class versus lower class. Your family bloodline is better than somebody else's, therefore you should be treated a different way. These things exist in these other countries, and we're opening up the gates. And to think that these same problems and these same patterns and these same systems and or racial tensions wouldn't be brought over. They're not erased when they come here. Just because Canada is a welcoming place. Well, if it's just a welcoming place, what you're doing is you're just opening the door for new forms of tribalism to take hold. Because if you impose, let's say if we had immigration, we had strict cultural, if we say like, well, you got to adopt these cultural values and Canada's super strict on it, maybe you'd be filtering out and you wouldn't have some of the good things from other cultures. Maybe that'd be lost, but you'd also be filtering out some of these like negative effects, this tribalism that'd be brought on. We're already seeing it with like interracial group violence in Canada. Like they're between protests, there's no shortage of it, and there'll be no shortage in the future is my feeling anyways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there definitely used to be a bit of a, I would say more of an emphasis even in Canada of we really had a strong emphasis, I would say, in the, and I can only use my personal experience for this one because I'm a first generation Canadian. So what my parents told me anyway, that when they were attempting to come, when their families were trying to get into Canada, it was a long process. It took a long time, like many years, multiple years. You had to certainly pass a very difficult citizenship exam. You had to know a lot about the country. There were people at the time, they, kind of was a running commentary. They said, that people would think that a newly made Canadian citizen often knew more about Canada's history than people who were born here. So it was something that was very highly prized. Was the willingness to adopt Canadian values and to become a member of this new, like the recognition that the reason why you tried so hard to get here is because you know that you're going to have a better life here than from where you came. So there was a bit of a there was more, I guess. It's hard to ascribe these emotions to people you don't know, but it feels like there was maybe a little bit more gratitude from the people who were coming, but in the 60s and 70s, kind of that first sort of major wave of immigration to Canada than there is now.
Well, it almost sounds like you're describing the process was more difficult. It took more work on the individuals, and there's a sense of accomplishment for learning and passing the test and getting through that. And even I have some friends who recently immigrated who are upset at how easy it's getting for people to immigrate, because it almost devalues all the effort they went into and the steps
what they had to go through. Yeah.
If somebody comes in illegally and is granted like a permanent residence, like afterwards, instead of like deporting them, they say like, well, you came here, it's still not the best, but we'll let you stay anyways. That is insulting to people who worked hard, and the many people who come to Canada, they love Canada, they do a great job, and they fit right in, and they help make Canada a better place. So it is difficult because we are a country built on immigration to a certain point. Canada is maybe a little bit different than the UK. The UK is even, it's tough because and then you have Ireland, and you have populations that were pretty homogenous. So their problems are going to be, it's going to be amplified because of how homogenous the people were. In Canada, we've had quite a mix of, like you think about how many different countries in Europe and how many different cultures. Even if Canada was primarily European for a certain amount of time, you still had a mix of European cultures. Yeah. So it was never as homogenous as maybe Sweden or Ireland in that way.
Yeah, countries like the Nordic countries specifically have a very long history of being very, actually somewhat isolationist in their policies, and their, you could see for a number of years prior to a very recent kind of shift in immigration policy, specifically in like Sweden, like you say. The Netherlands also is suffering from this in a different way. Of being very homogenous and very, that. And the trouble is when you say this, at least for me, I always feel like I have to couch it in like, well, I don't mean white people are better. Obviously we're not saying that, but you could make the same argument for like a country like Japan. Japan is a very extremely homogenous society, very, very historically isolationist. Like for hundreds of years, you couldn't even go to Japan. Japan really only opened themselves up to the world, and I think maybe less than 150 years ago. And they have, that's a similar thing that you can say of the Nordic countries, where extremely low crime, very prosperous in different ways. A very efficient sort of wealthy, high upward mobility society. And those aren't white people, they're Asian people, so it doesn't have anything to do with race so much as it has to do with if there are certain things that I believe you can only properly accomplish as a nation if you have a group of people willing to work towards similar ends, who have similar desires. Yeah, it's like a homogenous in how tight-knit their culture is, how well their values are shared. And then like you need that for a high trust society. And I think Japan's one example of that. And we have many examples of low trust societies. But one other point on Japan is like, I would never dream of, like, I would never go to Japan and be disrespectful in public and take pictures of a geisha and
like that would, I know culturally that wouldn't fly with them.
Yeah.
And there would be
you get kicked
pushback.
out. Literally, you'd get kicked out.
Imagine me going there and they get angry at me and I'd call them racist. What if they flip this, like if the script resembled how we treat these situations in North America or in the UK right now, you would say, well, somebody going in and doing something against some of these established cultural values of the place they're moving to or visiting somehow have more power and they're shielded from criticism.
Yeah.
And we would never see that in anybody traveling to Japan. They don't operate that way. They don't let it slide.
Yeah. Yeah. The power of the way that, and I don't know, like, I don't think it's only explained by like self-hatred or self like guilting, like white guilt or whatever you want to call it. I don't think it's solely explained by that. I think that's a big part of it, but the power of labels in our culture is very strong. People have a very, and I think that as well is sort of is an example of, like there's such a, the words, like, calling somebody a racist or xenophobe or a sexist or something, it wouldn't have the power that it does in discourse if we truly were that as a society, because then people wouldn't care if they were called that. It wouldn't matter to them. You could freely admit to being such, and it wouldn't impact you in any way. But we are so strongly averse to those ideas that even the threat of being perceived as it is so distasteful to us.
Yeah,
I've
if you had
got
an entire country of like truly sexist people, that accusation would be like, it wouldn't be giving any new information. It wouldn't be discerning between anybody. It would not be, you couldn't accuse anybody. You just assume everybody is that. So
yeah,
the reason, we actually care about being called these labels. And I think now we're starting to see a pushback because it's being overused.
Yeah.
You're seeing people who, well, they'll say that like, if you haven't been called a racist or a bigot or misogynistic for just having a conversation, then you're not discussing things of importance. You're not asking the right questions because it gets thrown around so much. I think that's it's a initiation that everybody has to go through, is be called a bigot at least once.
It's a strange place to be in, yeah. To know you're doing something right if you're being called those things. I'm going to share, this is actually, I think, a good segue into this. This is a very interesting double quick video here of something Christopher Hitchens said back in 2009 versus what the current Prime Minister of the UK is saying. So this refers to what we were just talking about as far as terminology goes, and in this case specifically Islamophobia. So this is a very I think timely quote that that iHypocrite found. So I'll play that right now.
Give it up or give it to your deadliest enemy and pay for the rope that will choke you. This is very urgent business, ladies and gentlemen. I beseech you. Resist it while you still can, and before the right to complain is taken away from you, which will be the next thing. You will be told you can't complain because you're Islamophobic. The term is already being introduced into the culture as if it was an accusation of race hatred, for example, or bigotry, whereas it's only the objection to the preachings of a very extreme and absolutist religion. Watch out for these symptoms. They are not the symptoms of surrender, very often ecumenically offered to you by men of God in other robes, Christian and Jewish and smarmy ecumenical. These are the ones who will hold open the gates for the barbarians. The barbarians never take a city till someone holds the gates open for them. And it's your own preachers who will do it for you, and your own multicultural authorities who will do it for you. Resist it while you can. And if you wonder what will happen if you don't, look and see how a cricket team in Middlesex in England had to change its name by force last week because it was called, and had been for years, the Middlesex Crusaders. Look and see How stories about little pigs can't be taught to children in English schools anymore, lest offense be taken by the religion of peace. Resist it while you can.
One of the things that is coming up over and over again is Islamophobia. And well, you can see the stats, you can see the numbers rising, particularly since October the 7th. Although we shouldn't fall into the trap of thinking that before October the 7th, this was all heading in the right direction. It's been far too high for far too long. Clearly, we need to just say over and over again, Islamophobia is intolerable. It can never, ever be justified. And we have to continue with a zero tolerance approach. And I think there's more we can do in government. There's certainly stuff online which I think needs tackling much more robustly than it is at the moment.
What I'm hoping, Keir, is your experience as a prosecutor means you'll be thinking about the strategy we can use to make sure we take action against those who break the law.
So thoughts there, James?
Well, I wish Hitchens was here today. He would have a lot to say about what's unfolding in the world now. But the contrast between those two clips was quite impressive. Just the one was just Hitchens very much focused on like, well, you have to use your free speech now because it's slowly being eroded. The term Islamophobia is also, it's a weighted term and it's being used in a political way. And then you contrast that to, well, today in the UK, they're saying, well, we need more top-down controls, specifically policing through digitally monitoring policing speech to control Islamophobia. And they said it was on the rise. It also depends on how they're measuring. So do they just like go on Twitter, X, and look at a mention, they do a keyword search and be like, well, there's been more keywords of this keyword, therefore hate's increased, and that's the metric. And then they have to impose some fix based on some random modeling that you can create these trends however you want. So
yeah, it's it's another example of you have Hitchens telling you, listen, these people are going to use words against you to stifle your speech, and they're going to do it in a way that's meant to control you. And then literally you have a man who is directing a government right now to jail people, to literally put like young kids in prison for things that they say online because it's deemed that term that Hitchens 15 years ago was saying this is what's going to happen. Man,
he could see the patterns.
Yeah, I wonder what the UK would be like today if he were still around, because I feel like was I don't know if he had a moderating effect on the culture there, because he was so well respected and so biting, and so like he had a way of really getting to the truth of things in a way that you just couldn't deny. He was just his thought was just on such a higher level than everyone else around him that you just couldn't help but kind of be amazed by it. And I wonder if it'd be any different today.
I think he would have got the Jordan Peterson treatment.
Very high potential. Yeah, very high likelihood. Yeah. I think he could well, it didn't seem to hurt Peterson, I met him one time at a talk that he gave in Alberta here, and I told him that it was I said that it's a shame that people view you as controversial, and like what you're saying is controversial. And he said, there are worse things. And I was like, well, I guess that's true, because I mean he's managed to make it work for him. But yeah, that's
but the one observation there is the perceived, the fact that he's deemed controversial, or that if you sample, and I have friends and family, like if I bring up that name, they have negative connotations, or they'll only remember him from one little event. Mm-hmm. Or you'll mention somebody like Joe Rogan, and they're like, I don't know about him. He's a little radical. He took horse paste. And then you're like, well, that's a room temperature
or
IQ.
he told other people to take horse-based.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These are room temperature IQ takes, and it doesn't matter if you're talking about Fahrenheit or Celsius. It still works. But yeah, like, so you get these, even with these kind of juggernauts with a large platform, large reach, I think we're still showing the power of media over a inactive, not inactive, like a people who don't actively participate and seek out information or seek out ideas contrary to what they believe. So these NPCs just following their beliefs match up with what they're told for many things.
Yeah.
And then we get cases of like, well, friends and family, maybe they're not as informed. They don't listen to as much media. They're just out of the picture. So they're just getting ideas from like osmosis through whatever's mentioned. There still is this opportunity to like, well, talk about these things, or maybe you bring up immigration numbers, like you mentioned, like, well, is 10 million per year too much in Canada? And then you like get them to a point where they've admitted, yeah, maybe a hard cap at some point, maybe there is a sustainable number, or maybe there's a different way. Like, rather than treating these things as blind truths and blind narratives of like, well, Canada requires immigration, we just open up the floodgates and we never do a check and balance. We never do a double check on like how much we should do. So I'm hoping we have more of these conversations.
Yeah, and to that point, you know, there's and maybe we can wrap up on this, but to the point of, you know, yeah, there obviously we have to agree that there's a limit of, you know, amount of people we can welcome into any place at any time, because if for no other reason, then what is the life that those people that you're purporting to want to help, what is that going to be when they get there? You know, I think this was months ago, but I believe we saw some statistics that it's been about a decade since the major Syrian refugee crisis into Canada, and maybe you can recall better than I can, but I believe the number was like only 10% of those Syrian refugees who came in that initial wave are making above a poverty wage right now. Like, so you've got, you know, if you want to use, as a lot of these people who are very pro immigration want to use, that you're doing this to help people and to better the lives of people. Well, in order to do that, you have to acknowledge that there is an upper limit, because past that point, you actually aren't helping people. You're just shuffling them from one place of the world to another. And if there's nothing there for them to move, to have, like I say, that upward mobility that other countries have, actually you're objectively making their lives worse, because now you've uprooted them from their home with the promise of a better life, and all that they have is either exactly what they had at home or worse, because now they are not surrounded by their family and the places they grew up in and things, and there's nothing for them to aspire to strive to, because the infrastructure is not in place for it. So yeah, there's definitely a broader conversation to be had here, other than either you're pro-immigration because you love people, or you're anti-immigration because you hate people.
Well, there's one example I've been meaning to ask more people of like, well, let's say you have a family, you have 3 kids, and well, there's a whole bunch of kids that need to be adopted. What would adopting one kid do to your like family, to your schedule, to your, well, you need to pay for food and you need space for another bed. And well, what about two adopted kids? You have 5 kids now. What if you have more adopted kids than you have your biological kids? Like, what if you take them all in one year? Like, it gets progressively harder for that to be feasible. And I think that's an example where it hits a little closer to home, because then they're like, well, I have to cook larger meals, and like that welfare, that family welfare state that they have to rely on. A lot of people find it very difficult, even just to get all the meals, get their kids fed, keep the kids happy, keep them get them to school in time. And all these things are difficult enough with the number of kids that they have right now. In Canada, we are struggling to just provide even reasonable healthcare to the citizens that we have right now. Our roads are always under construction. Like, we have a water main break in Calgary, so they're under water restrictions right now. We have a lot of money that's required to just keep Canada functioning the way it is. So we can't even divert less money to that without more things breaking, which would decrease the quality of life of the people coming here anyways, because they're not getting the quality of services that Canada's known for. So it still doesn't make sense from that standpoint as well. That's what I'm trying to reinforce. So
yeah, people don't like talking about those things because it makes it feel like transactional or like a business arrangement or something. But the fact is that it kind of is a business arrangement, because you do have to financially account for these things. You can't just, it's a little naive to think that you can just, well, we're just welcoming people. we're just welcoming people into new Canadians, Well, okay, but how about all the other things? There's a lot of things that go into living a good life, and if you can't, if the pace of constructing that good life, there's a lot of things that went into constructing what we have here, and to allow two goofballs like you and me to sit in air-conditioned rooms and ruminate on this stuff online. There's a lot of stuff that had to go right for us to get to this place, and it's not an accident. So it takes a lot of administrating, and people need to start thinking about it more, I think, in that way than just from the feel good ways.
yeah, I think that gives us plenty to think on, plenty to potentially relay in further discussions. I think this is one we'll probably be returning to, because it's not a problem that is on its way to being solved. It is currently still getting worse before it's going to get better.
Yeah.
Fortunately, it feels like there's a few more conversations happening, and there's a little bit more awareness. So hopefully that's a step in the right direction.
Yep. Sweet.
Awesome.
Thanks
Well,
as
that's a
always,
good place
James.
yeah. I love these discussions. Hope as an audience you're enjoying these as well.
Yeah. Make sure to subscribe to us. Probably follow us on X first, and then if you want, subscribe to us on YouTube and Rumble, and we're on Spotify now. So you can find us everywhere under the Critical Compass. So yeah, thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you again shortly.
Yeah. Cheers.
Cheers.